Sorry about that. So this is the sixth video overall. This should be the fourth video for notes, though. Fourth video for notes. So if you haven't watched the first three, what are you doing here? Go watch those ones. Okay. We're starting on notes on secession. Okay. So there are two different types of secession. Okay. What secession is? Secession is the change over time of an ecosystem. Okay. As you might have become familiar with, ecosystems don't stay the same over time. A grassland changes. We just call it a grassland because, predominantly speaking, that's what it is. But there's going to be slight variations and changes over time. It may take a long time to get there. Okay, and that's what we're talking about right now. There's two different types of secession. One, primary secession. Okay, primary secession is what happens first. Okay, it starts off with bare rocks and it breaks down those rocks into soil, which will lead into different species going through. As you can see with this photo, it goes from bare rocks to lichens, which is the what people call moss, but it's not moss on rocks. Okay, the orange, green, white on rocks. They're breaking down the rock into smaller bits, which allow for small annuals and other lichens and mosses at that point to get on and to start growing the soil, which will then further break down the rock, which make grasses and perennials available to come in, which further break down the rock and soil, which then allow for grasses, shrubs, shade-intolerant trees, such as pines, to come in. And then that allows for shade-tolerant trees, such as oaks and hickories, to come in. So this progression over time, that's what secession is. Okay, it only happens once. Only happens once. You only get primary secession once when it's breaking down that rock and then developing into all these other things. Okay. Secondary secession, on the other hand, happens after a disturbance. In this case, in this picture, is fire, but it can be a number of different things. A landslide, it can be a flood, it could be any sort of disturbance, major disturbance. It's going to start changing over time. How do plants come back into the fold? It takes time, but over that time, it'll change. Okay. What this all leads to, how these both are connected, okay, is it's how it reacts and how it changes over time to go to a climax community. Okay. Climax community is the final stage. Yawned. Sorry about that. It's the final stage of the secession. Okay, it's these old forests or these final steps within that community. Okay. Scientists like to argue about it because there's always change happening. Okay, there's always some sort of thing that's changing about the ecosystem, so it's really hard to tell when a climax community is at its climax. But some people even argue that there's no such thing as a climax community because everything is changing so much and it's always changing. So there's no definitive part showing that this is when we can say that this is the last bit of it. Okay, but this is a general overview about what secession is and what that means. Okay, again, secession is just how does an ecosystem or an area change over time? What are the plants that are involved? What are the animals that are involved? Okay. Speaking of animals, we're going to start talking about significant species. And I'll explain what significant species mean. It's not just like, oh, the tiger is important for this, the bison's important for this. No, these are going to be different labels we could have for species. So if you are interested in doing the species research project for your assignment this week, this is a section you're going to want to take notes on specifically. Okay. So just looking through these photos, I made some of these. This whole side I found online, but then this side I put together to kind of mimic that and show some other species that I really enjoy. So it shows some of my favorite animals and trees. So I've got up here we have the tiger. We have, oh, I forget what this is called, but it's a crazy plant in the tropics. We have a wolf. We have the pangolin, which is one of my favorite animals. The octopus, my favorite sea animal. A poison dart frog, a tree frog. We have baboa trees. I think it's called baboa trees. Don't quote me on that. But they live in Madagascar. They're really cool. The American bison, one of my favorite animals that I've seen in person. Love the bison. The giant sequoia, my favorite tree. And the bristlecone pine, the oldest living tree. Oldest living organism, I believe. Like 10,000 plus years. Very old trees. Bristlecone pines. But no, just a little bit of some stuff here. Significant species, though. So with this section, we're going to talk about different roles or niches that these things hold. The different species hold. So a keystone species, you've probably heard of before. A keystone species, they are a species that has a disproportionately large effect on a community or ecosystem. Okay, classic example of that is going to be the beaver. Okay, so that's why I have the pictures of the beaver dams here. Okay, the keystone species, you know, is a keystone species because its removal or addition changes the community or ecosystem on a drastic scale. Okay, so there's a lot of change that happens because of these, either them being removed or they're adding into an ecosystem. Okay. Sorry again. Like I said, classic example is the beaver. Okay, beavers create dams which affect everything. Holds back water, which creates a number of different niches available for other species to fill. So without beavers in an area, the whole area just becomes a river or a stream, okay? But with beavers in this area, they create all of these other things. They create nesting sites for birds. They increase waterfowl populations because now you have more nesting sites for birds, which means you'll have more waterfowl in the area, which means you'll have more water in the area overall, meaning you'll have more fish population because there's more water. Those kind of things. They create a bunch of different things beyond their scope that affect the ecosystem around them. They're the most destructive species to their environment besides humans. So, wonderful creatures, beavers. Next one is a pioneer species. Okay, we just talked about succession. A pioneer species is the first species to colonize barren environments, whether that be primary succession, things that never had anything grown, kind of like what we're seeing in these photos, or secondary succession, the first plants to come out after. Excuse me, I need to plant some water or something. The first species after a disturbance. Okay, really linked with succession. Okay, because it's the first species that are there to help bring back the ecosystem to allow for things to grow. Okay, this change of species composition over time. Like I said, that's what succession is. Change of species composition in an area over time. My favorite example is moss. Okay, I think moss is super cool. If you haven't noticed, I tend to favor plants more so than I favor animals. Not saying animals are bad, but plants are cooler. And if you don't agree with me, I think you're wrong. But anyway, moss I think is super, super cool. One of the reasons why I think moss is super cool is it's the only plant that survives and lives on all 7 continents. Yes, it even lives in Antarctica. This top photo, this is one of the great moss fields of Antarctica. So it lives and thrives in that ecosystem. Moss is super adaptable. It's a wonderful little thing. But yeah, they're a great pioneer species. Most of the time after a disturbance, they're going to be there to help start breaking down the rock and soil into things that plants can then start to use, making it more habitable for things to grow. So if you think about it, maybe over time, with all this climate change stuff happening and the moss that is surviving and growing at the Arctic, we might have a small forest or a grassland at some point on the Antarctic. Now, that's probably not a good thing, but it might happen. Who knows? All right, last one we're going to do in this video is the indicator species. Okay, so an indicator species, what do they do? Okay, an indicator species is a species whose population health may indicate if the ecosystem conditions are healthy or degraded. So their whole population health is a great sign as to what the health of the ecosystem is. Okay, it's a good measure. So instead of a scientist going out and having to measure all these specific things, they can look at an indicator species and say, they're not doing well, so the ecosystem is not going to be doing well. Or they're doing great, so this ecosystem must be healthy because this population is doing great. Okay? In our neck of the woods, the Gunnison sage grouse is going to be a great example of that. Okay? The reason why is because they have these patterns here. This down here is a lek, L-E-K, a lek. It's how they mate, and that's how they produce eggs and brood. So without this healthy ecosystem around them, these sage grouse don't lek. They don't have these things. So if the ecosystem is destroyed or it's not very good, the population for our sage grouse decreases. That's why oil and gas development in these sage areas are very hard on these birds, and we do a lot to make sure that they are staying healthy, because if their ecosystem around them is degraded because of construction equipment coming through and oil equipment coming through, these birds are going to die off. They're already endangered, so if we have continued growth or continued development on these areas, they're going to go extinct pretty quickly. Okay? Alright, so that's the last one for this video. I will catch you in the next one. Alright, bye-bye.